This webinar will be recorded. Okay, webinar is being recorded, everybody. And hi, everybody, and thanks and welcome. Thanks for being here today. We really appreciate your taking the time to talk with us about occupational safety and health programs and how they specifically relate to high road training programs. My name's Pam Egan. I'm with the UC Berkeley Labor Center. And this is the fifth in a series of webinars that's sponsored by the California Workforce Development Board under the High Road Training Partnerships Initiative. And we really appreciate the sponsorship of the Workforce Development Board in these sessions. If you feel like putting your name and your organizational affiliation in the chat so that your colleagues can see who's on our call today, that would be terrific. We're a fairly informal bunch, so as I think most of you know who've participated in these before, I encourage everybody to type their questions in the chat as we go along, and when we get to the question and answer portion, we'll go ahead through those questions in the chat. And if you'd like to ask your question directly, just put the word stack in the chat and we'll call on you and you can ask your question to our panelists directly when we get down to Q&A. We'd like this presentation to be pretty interactive. We've got some poll questions for you. And we're also going to be hearing from some really experienced high road practitioners about how they use occupational health and safety training to improve job quality, raise worker voice, and create conditions that advance partnerships between workers and employers. And then we're going to be hearing from occupational health and safety experts from UC Berkeley's Labor Occupational Health Program, LOHP, about the strategies they use to develop worker-centered health and safety training that builds worker skills and strengthens partnership infrastructure. So that's kind of our focus today. And I'd like to start by framing that discussion around the issues that are very specific to the Workforce Board's High Road Training Partnership Initiative: job quality, equity, and climate resilience. Now, it's pretty clear, I think, that wages and benefits are not all that we talk about when we're talking about job quality. Clearly, safe and healthy working conditions are a critical measure of job quality. I'm going to be sharing a lot of data from the AFL-CIO's 2021 report. It's an annual report that they prepare called Death on the Job, the Toll of Neglect. And the 2021 report refers to 2019 data. And for me, this top line data that I'll share right now really points to how occupational health and safety impacts job quality for all workers. In 2019, and by the way, we'll link the report in the chat so you can all look at it in more depth. But in 2019, 5,333 workers were killed on the job. That's an average of 15 workers each day. So clearly that's a job quality issue. There were 95,000 estimated annual deaths from occupational disease in the US, and that's considered probably an underestimate. There were 3.5 million reported, that's reported, work-related injuries and illnesses, so not those that are unreported. And in 2019, 1 in 6 workplace deaths was attributed to workplace violence, a growing concern. So clearly a job quality issue for everybody. But it's also an equity issue. 20% of workers killed on the job are Latino from that same report. And that percentage increased in 2019. And of those workers, 66% were born outside the United States. So an issue that affects immigrant workers. 12% of workers killed on the job are Black, again, a percentage that increased in 2019. And both Latinx and Black workers are killed on the job at higher rates than the national average for all workers combined. And 2 out of every 3 serious workplace violence events are suffered by women. And it also touches older workers. Workers that are 65 or older are nearly 3 times more likely to be killed on the job than other workers. And we all know that the pandemic both exposed and exacerbated the impact of health and safety gaps on all workers, but also on priority populations, those workers that we serve. Again, this report indicates, and we all know, that workers of color are disproportionately employed in occupations where large outbreaks of COVID occurred, meat packing, food processing, ag, transit. And these workers are especially vulnerable when raising job safety concerns because they often have fewer protections or less access to enforcement. And for healthcare workers, the problems are indescribable. In just the first year of COVID alone, Guardian and Kaiser Health reported that they identified more than 3,600 healthcare worker deaths just in the first year of COVID. So when we see the numbers for 2020 and certainly 2021, we'll be seeing a different, an even more challenging picture, I believe. So that's, just a glimpse at the human toll of failures in occupational safety and health. There's also a huge economic toll. For employers, the estimated cost of just the most disabling workplace injuries was more than $55 billion a year. That's more than $1 billion a week, again, just for a subset of disabling injuries. And for working families, the economic toll is hard to measure. A 2015 OSHA report indicated that even after receiving workers' compensation benefits, an injured worker's income was on average nearly $31,000 lower over 10 years than if they hadn't suffered an injury. And that's with receiving work comp benefits. And then finally, we can expect the climate crisis, one of our 3 pillars, to exacerbate health and safety concerns, particularly for our priority populations and the sectors where we work. Extreme heat, wildfires, extreme weather events, air pollution, biological hazards and pesticides, psychological and stress and productivity losses, all of these are increasing in intensity. And again, these are hazards that particularly affect essential workers, frontline workers, the folks that we serve, first responders and care workers, outdoor workers, and public sector workers. So that's kind of a bleak picture. But what do we do about it? Typically, we look to health and safety training. However, most existing health and safety training can't address these expanding needs across sectors. There's great and important training like OSHA 10 and OSHA 30 that provides critical information and really important certifications, but they're too broad to really address the evolving needs across these various sectors. And traditional OSHA trainings don't really provide the advocacy skills and the partnership structures and skills that we need to make up for lack of enforcement capacity, and really to bring workers and employers together to partner to prevent injury and illness from happening in the first place, right? But high road partnerships like all of yours are really uniquely positioned to create kind of a new paradigm here, a new worker-centered, partnership-based approach to workplace health and safety. You all can use worker and employer wisdom to identify those shifting health and safety concerns in your sectors, and then to engage employers and workers in designing interventions that meet our goals, that they make jobs better by improving job safety. They increase equity by mitigating those outsized risks that are faced by priority populations, and that respond to climate impacted industries and occupations. All the while, you're meeting employer needs and you're strengthening your partnership structures. So that's kind of a framing of what we're going to talk about today. And we'll have 2 incredible panels, as I mentioned, of practitioners and subject matter experts to give us some practical strategies to think about that. But first, we want to hear from all of you. So we pulled together some poll questions, and we're going to ask you all to respond to this non-scientific poll. Karina, if you want to go ahead and put up the poll questions. Just go ahead and respond, provide your first response, a yes, no, or unsure to these questions. I'll read them out, but feel free to go through and just tag what you think. Do you currently include occupational safety and health training in your projects? Is occupational safety and health training offered to fulfill a mandatory industry or credentialing standard? Go ahead and click yes, no, or unsure. And if you do an OSHA program, does it include training and opportunities for participants to develop communications and problem-solving skills, or is it more content-based like OSHA 10 and OSHA 30? And then do your employer and union partners have health and safety committees on the job, on the site there, if you know, of course. And if they do, does your partnership work with the job site health and safety structures? Do you connect there? Or are they two sort of separate things, something in the training program and something on the job site? And probably the final question is the most important. Do you have a need for new or additional job or sector specific occupational safety and health training for the workers that you serve? Great. Okay, has everybody had a chance to respond?
We'll give people another minute or so. We have a couple more trickling in.
Wonderful, thank you. So that just gives us sort of a picture of where you are as we think about how to work with great folks like Diane and Laura to develop more programs and learn from Sarah, Louise, and Elizabeth. Okay. Still more responses trickling in. We appreciate that. Okay. Getting close.
We'll
All right, let's see.
Close the poll.
Great. We'll take a look at the results. Okay. Looks like many of you do currently have trainings in your projects. That's terrific to know. And some to fulfill a standard, but others because somebody decided it was of good value. So that's interesting to know. And terrific to see that these programs include opportunities for participants to develop these broader skills. Not surprising in a high road community. That's really fantastic. Not sure about what's going on at the employer union partner level. Okay, so it would be good to develop more information there. And then kind of a mix on whether the partnership works with job site health and safety structures, whether there's a sort of a connection between training and the job site. And then finally, not sure is the big response on whether there's a need for new or additional OSHA training for the folks that you serve. So again, something that we can explore and learn more about. Great, thank you very much. Okay, well, let's now then turn to our practitioner expert panel. Our conversation is going to be led today by three really experienced practitioners, and Karina is going to put their bios in the chat because they're really extraordinary colleagues of ours. We have today Sarah Miles, Western State Council's Workforce Development Advisor at the United Food and Commercial Workers Union. Elizabeth Toops, the Director of Utilities Training Programs at Jewish Vocational Services. Louise Sandoval, the Executive Director of Building Skills Partnership. So let's dive in, starting with you, Sarah. You've been a leading advocate for enhanced occupational health and safety trainings for workers in grocery, retail, and meatpacking. Talk to us about how you use worker-centered occupational safety and health training to improve job quality and advance equity.
Absolutely. Hi, all. I'm Sarah Miles, as Pam shared. I'm the Workforce Development Advisor to United Food and Commercial Workers Western States Council. We are the coordinating body of 9 locals across California, and we represent collectively about 150,000 California workers, primarily in the food sector, but also healthcare. Our work with LOHP and specifically really grew out of the pandemic. About 95% of our members are essential workers, so they worked throughout the pandemic. I want to take us all back into that scarred space of the early pandemic when we didn't know how COVID was transmitted, we were washing our literal groceries, and before the aerosol transmission became general knowledge. And we were able to work with LOHP, Laura Stonk, and Diane Bush and her team to help keep our members best informed and in terms of the hazards and the best practices in terms of protecting themselves throughout the pandemic. Our project, the Work Forward UFCW project, HRTP, is a baby HRTP. We started at about 6 months into the pandemic. So we had a very, very steep learning curve. And when I initially approached the HRTP concept in terms of developing workforce training for our members, the worker voice component seemed really abstract to me. And there was a natural linkage between OSH training and improving worker voice on the job site, specifically because of the training programs that Diane and Laura and her team at LOHP provide. They are the subject matter experts. I can get people in a room, I can get curriculum packaged, but I can't provide that specific content that our members need to be able to advance to do their job well, and then to advance in their career. So that's really been our experience with OSH. It's met easily and beautifully the standard of expectation of worker voice and empowerment within HRTP, but it also literally kept our members safe. I'm going to give you a couple of examples of some trainings that LOHP has on shelf and then also provided in the crisis situation. The first is the OSHA program, and Laura will speak of that a little bit later in more specifics, but it's a really great generalized training that it's 12 to 16 hours, and it's very interactive and engaged, and you actually apply concepts of OSH to your job site, like drawing hazards in your workspace and better understanding your role in that space and your rights in that space as well. So it covers things like the IIPP criteria, the responsibilities of employers, and then your rights as a worker to advocate for yourself, to stay safe and keep, in our sphere, the customers, the public safe as well. So that's been incredible. So the WOSHTEP, it's fantastic. I've taken it. It was great. And the second is we were able to partner with LOHP during the pandemic, as I said, for worker leader training, so that we could get our shop stewards and our reps, our union reps, best informed as to the latest information and best practices, as well as the law. So there was the emergency temporary standards during the pandemic that came about. And so we needed to inform our members of our rights. And the way we were best able to do that was through the advocacy through the union and making sure that our local staff knew what was appropriate. And the LOHP team worked with us in terms of how does this new regulation and the new laws that also came about through the pandemic, how do they fit, how do they apply for those specific work sites? And that was really incredible. And we have received a lot of feedback from members and from our local unions as to the critical role that LOHP was able to provide to get us the safety that we needed and the information out, and also that credibility that if I had done my research and provided it to the locals, I'm not the expert, as I said before. So our partnering with them made our workers safer, and then made my job and my coworkers' jobs in terms of implementing this HRTP program. We ticked boxes all the way. The quarterly reports were easily filled out in terms of worker voice efforts and successes. We trained our LOHP, trained about 75 of our stewards and reps to be able to provide direct information to workers on job sites in masks at grocery stores. And one more thing I want to add, they did also address workplace violence and safety, which, as I'm sure many of you are aware, is a concern, a continued concern at grocery stores, specifically in terms of clashes between mask mandates and all of the political aspect of it. These trainings, they provide opportunities for role playing, so that the worker has a better sense of how to identify an escalating situation with both a customer and then also in reporting it to an employer. So I just find tremendous value in working with LOHP, and I really encourage other HRTPs to explore their subject matter expertise and inherent programming.
That's great, Sarah. Thank you very much. It's really interesting to hear you describe how this was used to start, in the early part of an HRTP to start building that partnership. And now you've got structure with trained folks out there that are doing work that you can then go back to for other kinds of pieces of your high road partnership.
Absolutely. And one of the questions in the poll was the Worker Safety Committee. When I wrote the grant, I initially intended our partnership with LOHP to really be about cultivating the worker safety. But because we had that, had them built in to our grant as a partner, we were able to quickly pivot and focus on the crisis at hand. So I just really want to celebrate LOHP's dynamism and responsiveness.
In that way. That's terrific. So in that context, what additional resources do you need to be able to expand this work, take it to the next step?
Honestly, as a pretty bare bones skeleton crew, HRTP, I would really, I'm advocating for LOHP and other entities that are capable of that kind of work to get direct funding from the state to partner with us. The idea, candidly, of having UC Berkeley be a subcontractor is untenable. And there's not enough time in our grants, and there's not enough bodies in our offices to throw at that. So direct state funding to LOHP to collaborate with HRTPs is something that I think that we should all explore as we move our programs forward.
Terrific, terrific. And then finally, can you touch on how this work developed intentional partnerships between workers and employers?
Absolutely. A big one, which was unforeseen going into this grant project, is that LOHP also needed to inform employers as to their responsibilities as the ETS came out, as the laws came about, as the best practices for health and safety in a pandemic came out. And we were able to work with our signatory employers to help them access the training. And then our workers got a worker version of that training, and it helps them have a common dialogue, a vocabulary in common. And the employers knew that the workers got that training. So it's really hard to argue that you don't know about an IIPP when you and your employee took a training about IIPP. So that empowerment of the worker really helped level the playing field with the employers. And that's our job as a union.
That's terrific. Thanks, Sarah. I really appreciate that. I suspect folks will have some additional questions when we get to Q&A about all that great work.
Absolutely. And I'll put my email in the chat as well. If somebody wants to reach out later. Thank you all.
That's terrific. Thanks, Sarah. Well, let's turn now to Elizabeth Toops from JVS. And Elizabeth, JVS builds pathways to skilled jobs and critical water and wastewater infrastructure for underserved communities, for anybody who's not aware of that work. And a lot of your focus is on young workers, folks that are new to the workforce. In that context, what's your vision for enhanced OSHA training in your sector?
Well, Pam, let me just start off by saying that, we at JBS have a history of working with LOHP on worker-centered hazard awareness and workers' rights, and especially in our public transit-related pre-apprenticeship programs. It goes back, 4 or 5 years, and this was built in as part of, really the technical training that we offered our pre-apprentices that our employer and union partners really both supported initially, and we've sort of continued to try to prioritize that kind of training, and in our work with both water and wastewater employers as well as public transit. And in addition, we also offer students, sort of a garden variety OSHA 10 kind of certification. It's been particularly difficult in the last 2 years because those programs have not been able to the students haven't been able to get those programs in person, so we're offering these. I call them traffic school kinds of online courses that that really aren't that while the certificates are, you know, something that employers may like to see, it's not really getting at what we ultimately want to offer in terms of the technical training. And I keep talking about the technical training because we consider it to be part of the technical training that students really should be getting, just like they're getting other kinds of trade specific technical training. So our goal is really to build, you know, sort of an OSH focused program that reflects, like you said, the needs of younger, more diverse workers that may not have benefited from the kind of, you know, the long history of worker-centered OSH training that we know that the older workers in these public sector workforces have probably received over the years, but that it hasn't really been, it may not have been refreshed, it may not even be continuing to happen in a regular way. And so these younger workers are coming in with you know, without the same kind of focus in many work sites. So we're really trying to offer that as part of the pre-apprenticeship program, so that those younger workers are going onto the floor with some, you know, real critical, like I said, hazard awareness and also information about how to communicate any concerns that they have. Who do they communicate that information to? So the training that we're currently offering with in partnership with LOHP, who we have really enjoyed working with over the years, you know, includes things like hazard awareness of the work environment, identifying hazards, hazard analysis, controlling hazards and ergonomics, workers' rights and responsibilities, empowering workers to speak up, as I said before, and communicating about safety on the job, and finally, just making sure that the training, as all of our other training that we offer as part of pre-apprenticeship and apprenticeship training, is really, you know, culturally relevant and respectful to workers who, you know, are often the only women on their work site, or they may be the only person who's African American on their work site, or they may be, you know, half the age of all the other workers on their team. So how do we build in training that that recognizes all those sort of new the new paradigm of the public sector workforce?
That's extraordinary. So it sounds like you're really taking this sort of cultural approach, right? Building a culture of workplace safety that's also culturally sensitive, and integrating sort of the new workforce with the existing workforce and moving forward that way.
Yeah, exactly. And so, for instance, you know, the other kind of trainings that we offer are things like EEOC and you know, being aware of sexual harassment on the work site, and those kinds of things as well. But also just making sure that any, like I said, the OSH training is you know, sort of built around those that awareness as well.
So in that, what additional resources do you need to continue to build out that vision?
You know, first and foremost, I would say we need engaged employers and workers and worker representatives. In most cases, that's unions, obviously. But in our work in the Inland Empire, for instance, I think probably, I don't know, maybe half the workers are represented by an organized union. So we want to make sure that, number one, that we're engaging those employers, workers, and their representatives in the importance of this work, and why we want to do it, and also making sure that it's aligned with what the industry requires, and helps the new employee prepare for more extensive safety training that they may receive in the future. So it should be really industry and occupation specific. And then finally, sort of like what Sarah said, funding. We are actually, we've budgeted part of our HRTP funds to pay for this OSHA training that we're doing with our pre-apprentices. And that training, I think, is about 7 hours over 3 Saturdays. 2 of the 3 sessions are going to be online, and the third session is going to be in person. So we want to make sure that that going forward, that there is funding starting with HRTP that supports this training and also encourages it. I think it's one thing to support a training and say, oh yeah, sure, JBS offer the OSHA training, but is there a way for HRTP specifically and the workforce board more generally to take maybe even a stronger stance and say that that's that safety awareness, worker-led training, safety training is strongly recommended to be part of any training that's supported by HRTP.
Super, very, very, very helpful. And you mentioned employer engagement, and you mentioned making sure that things are industry relevant so that it works for the employers and also your participants get what they need to move through the industry. Does that speak to certification? Is certification for these kinds of programs important?
Yes, it is. And the industries that we're working with are typically look to more like an OSHA 30 for their standard training. And then there are also industry, there are other, sort of more, like I said, occupation specific kinds of safety trainings that are required as well. And I guess what I would just say about the work that we're doing with LOHP is our goal is to take it one step beyond what industry requires, and the industry required certifications don't tend to be worker led. For instance, they're checking off a box, and that's what the employer is focused on. Okay, I've got this employee needs confined spaces training. Let's check off that box, versus training that is worker led curriculum that is really built off of what we know workers will find to be empowering, and so, for instance, making sure that workers have some experience, at least in the training setting, with speaking up and helping to identify hazards, helping to communicate with their teammates and their employers about concerns that they have on the job.
Excellent. Thanks, Elizabeth. That's really practical information and direction for all of us. Appreciate that. And let me remind folks, if you've got questions as they come up, go ahead and put them in the chat, and we'll get to them when we get to our Q&A after our next panel. So to bring this panel home, we want to turn to Luis Sandoval with Building Skills Partnership. Luis, BSP's infectious disease certification program is really kind of a textbook example of employers and workers partnering to address health and safety on the job. And I was really inspired when I heard you say that was facilitated by your green janitor work, that created the infrastructure to allow you to do infectious disease, and then infectious disease created some special conditions in your partnership. that allowed you to take it further. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, good morning, and thank you so much for inviting me, and I'm glad to be part of this panel. I believe I have a presentation, so I'm not so sure
Yeah.
if it's being broadcasted or not. I can't say on my end, but let me give a little bit of context in terms of what BSP and what we do. So BSP is a statewide nonprofit that focuses primarily on janitors and also other property service workers, such as airport workers. We primarily work with this industry through a labor management relationship that we have with SEIU USWW, which is the janitorial union, and also they represent other property service workers. So if we kind of take a look back, going back to what Sarah mentioned earlier, today, if we look back where we're at, in the spring of 2020, when we started hearing news of COVID-19, many of the individuals that we work with didn't have the luxury because of the essential nature of their job to go home and work out of their home, right? So they were still asked to go to the workplace and work. And what we were finding was that there was a lot of instances of workers not necessarily knowing what COVID was. There was a lot of misinformation. There was a lot of confusion. There was a lot of questions about COVID. So we came together with our partners, both, here we go. We came together with our next slide, our labor management partners to really have a conversation about how do we develop, how do we meet the needs of the industry? How do we meet the needs of workers? And how do we meet the needs going forward about making sure that workers receive the proper information about COVID-19 and other infectious diseases that are out there. So through this framework, we were able to come together. However, going back to your question, Pam, that you mentioned is, our relationship with employers have been established for already since 2007. We started doing our Green Transportation program in 2012. So over the last 10 years, we've been building this relationship and building trust and building a working relationship with employer partners to really think about how do we address the needs of workers, but also the industry. And, first around vocational ESL. After that, it was around the Green Transportation program, right? And some of these programs were built under, a prior leadership, which was Saida Cardenas, who now is at the California Workforce Development Board and fully understands HRTP projects, fully understands labor management projects, right? So I think for us, when we were coming into this conversation about like this pivotal moment in our time about, what's happening at the workplace, what's impacting workers, we were really able to come into a place of, into agreement about how to move forward as an industry. But again, because of the success that we've had with vocational ESL and because of the success that we've had with the Green Child Education program, we were able to come into this space and really have a conversation. Okay, how do we address the work moving forward? And how do we make sure that we develop a training that meets and exceeds, I think, both the CDC guidance, but also make sure that we're providing the right and correct information to workers and making sure that workers are safe, right? That's the utmost requirement that we had. So through this labor management relationship that we had, we were able to really pull together a convening of partners to really think about what are the different topics that we need to have a conversation on, bring in experts, such as labor occupational safety and health program, bring in such as the UC Berkeley labor occupational health program, and really think about how do we develop this curriculum in a very, I would say, condensed time frame. So if you go into the next slide, let's see. Oh, there we go. So, we started hearing news about COVID April 2020. By March 6, 2020, we had already agreed on curriculum modules for training certification. Here, UCLA and UC Berkeley played a huge role in terms of helping us, advising us, guiding us through this process. What modules should be part of this? What's the type of curriculum that should go on here? What are the different themes that we should be touching on? Is it, should we just make it solely around COVID-19, or should we also talk about other, for example, bloodborne pathogens or prevention strategies? Should we talk about, for example, ergonomics, right? That's a huge component about, the work that goes into the janitor's job. So these are the different kind of like discussions that we had to have, and also have agreement between our labor partners and our employer partners, as well as those content experts, right? And, as you look at the flow here in terms of the timeline, by May 6th, we had already agreed. By May 13th, we were already presenting this framework to the statewide labor management committee comprised of, labor partners across the state, as well as our employer partners. And, by July 15th, we were already celebrating the first pilot graduation. So it's extremely condensed version. Today we're at the heels of graduating 1,000 workers through this, particular program, right? So looking back, almost 2 years from ago to today, we've graduated 1,000 workers in this program. That's, I think, an extremely, speaks to the success of this program, but I think also of the partnership. But I also want to give a lot of credit to our staff, because I think our staff fully understood the pivotal moment that we were in and really took, I think, a role in understanding how to move the relationships between, and move the relationships that we have with employers and I think labor and our external partners into a new era, I think, of working together. And because of it, I think, we've been able to develop something that has been, I think, very pivotal in terms of how we move forward. And I think also cementing the career pathway work that we're doing within BSP. So that's not only about occupational health and safety, or it's not only about COVID, but it's also about how do we ensure that we have career pathways for workers, right, through this model. So I want to give credit where credit's due. And I think here, I think our team and our dynamic team that we have statewide really were able to move this conversation forward by engaging all these different partners.
That's extraordinary.
Oh, and I was just going to share, let's see if there's this next slide on here. Oh, so, when we developed infectious disease, we did it over online. So again, not only addressing the curriculum issue, but also addressing the issue of social distancing, while also addressing the issues of equity. When we're talking about equity, and equity has different many lenses, right? In this particular case, we're talking about digital equity, right? How do we make sure that, underrepresented individuals who may not have the tools, may not have access to the skills in terms of, being able to connect to the internet, how do we not only bridge the gap around information around COVID, but also the digital equity piece, right? So we're bridging many different fronts, when we're looking at how do we onboard individuals to get and receive this training. So this is one of those examples. And the last slide that I have here, what was the prior slide? Thank you. What are some of the feedback? Here's a couple of quotes that we received from the infectious disease. Some of the participants, what we heard from them is that they were able to know how to do their job better. They often took this training home, and they were able to not only implement what they learned at the workplace, but also at the home. What we also, I think, understood is that they felt appreciated. And I think what we also heard was that they felt supported in their role. And I think that's extremely important, right? Not only recognize, and I think there's this narrative that, of course, they're frontline workers, but if they're frontline workers, we also, I would say we have to back it up, right? And how do we back that up, right? We make sure that, we're able to provide the training and also all the other benefits that go along with making sure that we recognize their essential role, right? And from the employers, we heard that, this was extremely important training for them. I think because we came in with the subject experts, UCLA and UC Berkeley, I think they really, we were able to lead in the space from the space of, we don't have the expertise, but our partners have the expertise, right? And we're bringing this as a resource to you to address this need that's happening in the industry. And it really helped them focus on what their bottom line is, while allowing us to come in here and really be in front of workers and provide this information to the workforce. So it really was a win-win. And I think as we continue, now we're continuing to pivot about, what is the post-COVID training going to look like? And that's the conversation that we've been having with employers. I think, having this as an experience and having this as a backdrop of what happened over the last 2 years will cement this work moving forward. And I can't say enough about UCLA and UC Berkeley, how they work really collaboratively with the projects, on the ground.
That's extraordinary. It's just such a great story. And as we said, kind of a textbook example. And you highlighted how you were solving problems for employers, making workplaces safer for workers, and working toward your equity goals too, including digital equity. I also understand that you've been looking at other sources of funding for this kind of work. Do you have any comments on where HRTPs might look for sources of funding for this kind of work?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think for us, one of the, this obviously addresses the issue around workplace safety, how to do their jobs better, touches around cleaning versus disinfecting, and then touches around, airborne and infectious disease. It touches around those themes, right? But there's also the real element around that we're looking at. How do we make sure that workers are safe at work and at home? And, during this time frame. So it was largely around COVID outreach, vaccine distribution, and so forth. So we partner with the various funders across the state of California. One of them, for example, Share Health, who's also receives money from the California Workforce Agency to do employer outreach and do workforce outreach around COVID vaccines. We partner really closely, and we touched about 8,000 different individuals across the state, not only giving them information, but also getting the vaccines to their arms, through the different partners that we had on the ground. So, so that's one example. I mean, I think there's other funding sources. The Department of Labor, I think they also have occupational health and safety grants. I think some of the partners that have mentioned, here today, I think they could share more about that. But I also would add that I think there's a lot of funding that's coming into the community college. And, we are also partners with the community college, Evergreen Community College being one of them, that are getting a lot of different funding solutions for to address some of these topics that we're talking about, and and they also have an interest in working with their HRTPs and labor management. So I think there's a lot of different innovative ways to tap into other sources of funding. It may not necessarily be funds the whole project, but you can look at portions of how to fund a project, right? And when you put all the all the pieces together, it funds a different project, right? So I think there, if you really think that how do you become innovative through the different funding sources, there's a lot of funding out there, and I'm more than happy to go into details. If I could provide my email address, and share some of those that may have questions.
That would be great. Thank you. Another terrific expert resource from our practitioners. Well, thank you to our practitioner experts. We really appreciate that. And again, I know folks will have a lot of questions and want to connect. Now, let's take a shift. We heard a lot of extraordinary things about the folks at LOHP and the work that they do. You have a big fan base out there, Laura and Diane. We're going to hear from Laura and Diane now. Laura Stock is the director of the Labor Occupational Health Program at UC Berkeley, and Diane Bush is the Occupational and Environmental Health Educator and Program Coordinator, also at LOHP at UC Berkeley. Laura and Diane, and their rich bios are in the chat as well. You both have such rich experience in designing and delivering worker-centered occupational safety and health programs. Will you start by sharing with us what you think a high road health and safety training program looks like?
Yes, thanks, Pam. Yeah, and I thought what I'd like to do is share some slides. Hopefully you're seeing slides now about a research project. Well, by way of sharing what we think a program should look like, I want to talk a little bit about a research project that we did recently with workforce development programs at community colleges. It was focused on the building trades. We wanted to see what kind of health and safety training was happening in those programs, and also help figure out what was really needed to prepare participants to be really truly work ready for safety. And as you've been hearing, we think that high road training programs should really be leading this effort, which it sounds like many of you are. But we really want to sort of capture that and call it out as part of the high road model. And when we talk about these kind of programs, we mean preparing workers to really participate effectively in good health and safety programs at their workplaces. So, not just knowing how to follow the rules, but coming in with the skills and the knowledge and the confidence to be able to actually contribute to safer workplaces, and even help shape some of those rules as you've been hearing. So I think you're getting a sense of the model. We want workers who can really help identify the problems and also help come up with solutions. So these are the core competencies that we developed out of that research project that we think high road programs should be teaching to. And an important part of this approach is really understanding what a good health and safety program should look like in the workplace. And these are the core elements that have been identified through research as actually contributing to decreased injury on the job. And what I've shared here is from federal OSHA, but in fact, here in California, our own injury and illness prevention program, or IIPP standard that you've been hearing about, captures all of these elements. So we want the participants to be prepared, and we want these elements to be reflected throughout the program. So reflected in the HRTP training programs themselves, as well as in the placements. And you can see at the top of the list of these elements that a health and safety program should have are management responsibility and leadership and commitment to health and safety. So it means the management needs to understand what all these elements should look like. And then worker participation is right up there at the top. So all of these systems for identifying hazards and addressing them need to build in the workers themselves in the workplace. And your trainees should be coming into the workplace expecting that and having the skills to be able to be part of a good program. And I think that Karina is going to share that resource. This is a federal resource, the recommended practices, and I'll share some more about the injury and illness prevention programs a little bit later. So in terms of our research, which involved surveying 270 administrators and instructors, this is across the country, so not just in California. We visited 3 sites that had kind of floated to the top based on our research on the survey results. So sites with good practices, and a couple of key things. One, we found that, in fact, yes, that management commitment is super important. So the schools and programs where the administration really understood what a health and safety program should look like had much better health and safety programs. And then training, the training itself, that skill building needs to provide practice, like you heard Sarah talking about role plays and things like that, but also actual things in the training program. Is there an inspection program? Do students participate in that? That kind of thing. And then again, also seeing those same opportunities to participate effectively in the program out in the job placement sites. So that means those placement sites also have to have that same management commitment and an understanding of what an IIPP should look like. So those are my slides for now. Come back for a little more later.
That's really extraordinary. I kept hearing, some very HRTP kind of words: management commitment, worker participation, worker engagement, and that's just really sort of thrilling, and it demonstrates probably why these are so connected and so effective in the HRTP setting. Can you talk to us about the difference between content-focused occupational safety and health programs like OSHA 10 and this worker-centered training that you describe?
Sure. Yeah, I wouldn't say they're exactly different, because when we talk about worker-centered training, we don't mean no content, but we mean teaching that content in a way that it's relevant and that's taught in a way that participants can put it to practice. So I'm currently going through an online OSHA 10, and it's killing me by slow death. So it's a very different thing to learn about your rights, listening to a list of them, or to actually understanding them and using them in a role play or some other situation. So that's what we mean by worker-centered. How are workers going to be using this information and really fitting into their health and safety program in the workplace, or be able to do that? The other thing I want to just note about worker-centered is it doesn't mean it doesn't benefit employers as well. And I think you've heard that already from some of the from Luis and others. But in some ways, I think, so working for an employer that really clearly cares about health and safety, demonstrated by having a good program that meaningfully engages employees in the program and where they follow through when problems are identified. So a workplace that actually feels safe and where it feels like people care about each other and where workers have actually some control or some agency over what that looks like and what their working conditions look like. That in itself improves job quality and job satisfaction. So a piece of it is obviously preventing injury and the horrible things that statistics you were sharing at the beginning. But in fact, sometimes just that sense of working in a safe workplace where people care about each other brings a lot more immediate value both to employees and to the employers. It means you can keep your workers longer. People want to work for your organization, and now is an important time to be able to be a good employer so that people want to work for you. So I just wanted to underline that piece of it.
I think that's really helpful. And the employer and workers, the fact that employers and workers are doing this work together starts to develop that structure that high road partnerships can then leverage for additional kinds of partnerships. So very helpful. Thank you. So one of the key elements of your training approach is building these self-advocacy skills. We've heard that throughout the conversation today. So I've got, translating that into HRTP language, it builds worker voice and power, both in skills and in infrastructure. I've got two questions around that. What tactics do you use to build those skills? And why is this self-advocacy or collective advocacy so important in occupational safety and health?
I'm going to throw that one to Laura.
All right, Laura.
Yes. Good morning, everyone. I'm happy to be here. And it's been great to hear from practitioners in the field. And I think a lot of the answers come from what we've heard already. But I think in general, just to reinforce some of what we've heard, part of it is the fact that the way we do our training, our methodology is specifically designed to give people the opportunity to practice skills and all the elements that Diane laid out. That includes providing hands-on opportunities to assess hazards and giving people an opportunity to do a walk-around assessment in their own shops, even in where they're being trained. Problem-solving case studies where people practice the skills and trying to figure out what are the strategies that they should use. And as I think a number of people before have mentioned, role plays where people actually have the opportunity to practice communication skills. And so these skills are really important because we don't know where these people are going to end up working in their career. We hope that in their training and in their apprenticeships, they're in environments where the job quality is good and that laws are being followed. That may or may not happen as they move forward. And they need to know how to navigate those situations. And one thing I just do want to acknowledge that I think there's a theme here about how important worker voice is, the critical importance of speaking up, but it's also important to recognize that workers in the most vulnerable positions, workers of color, immigrant workers, may fear retaliation. And so when building skills in speaking up, we really need to focus on strategies for speaking up that can assure that they're protected when they do so. And that might include things like helping them learn how to provide strong documentation, telling them about the importance of working with others as they raise their concerns and how that might protect them further. And as I mentioned, using effective communication skills that help people make the change effectively without focusing on the win-win that we've described earlier. And also with it, we need structures and policies that protect workers from retaliation. And these are the kinds of things that can be built into a strong high road training partnership. These can include clear systems for reporting concerns, policies that encourage worker participation, et cetera. We know that a key element of an effective health and safety program is a good safety culture. I think a lot of people have heard that term, safety culture. And that means where people are encouraged to speak up, since workers can be a critical partner in identifying problems and coming up with solutions. And one benefit that I might mention is that I think we all believe that the best way to solve worker health and safety problems is to deal with them within a workplace rather than relying on external enforcement agencies like OSHA. We know that OSHA is extremely under-resourced, and that's not the best strategy. It's sort of a strategy of last resort. The best strategy is to build systems into the workplace where an engaged and educated workforce can speak up and partner with their employers to try to come up with effective, to know what the problems are and come up with effective solutions.
You're muted, Pam.
You're muted.
Thank you. Some people say that's a good thing.
No, we wouldn't agree.
Okay, thank you. You did a great job. Thank you for touching on all of those pieces, and including the way worker-centered OSH training improves job quality and equity. Do you have some examples of sort of where you've seen that in practice?
Yeah, I was going to give an example from a program that Sarah described, and we were able to do this with them, which is our WOSHTEP program. As she mentioned, it's a statewide program that we participate, as well as sister programs at UCLA and UC Davis. And it is a skill building program to prepare worker leaders to play an active role, health and safety role in their workplaces. As part of the training, they develop a plan of action based on the knowledge of skills that they gain in the class. And so the idea is to make these accessible to all different kinds of workplace. We've delivered this class in unionized and non-union, with vulnerable workers and with immigrant workers, and a whole range, because we believe that to give them these skills is the best way for them to advocate for themselves and to get the kind of protections that they deserve. And I thought I'd just share one story from a participant in this program, where the program to build their capacity to participate in health and safety activities. So an example is a participant who was the vice president and training director of IATSE Local 16, which is a union for technicians working in the entertainment industry. And he reported to us how participation in this kind of training has shaped his trajectory as a health and safety advocate and leader in his workplace. After learning about methods for assessing hazards, he realized that there were many hazards that he had never noticed, and he took action to engage his coworkers. And he began holding Safety Thursdays with trainings, 2 to 3 hour trainings on topics from ladder safety to biological hazards. He wanted to create a company safe culture of safety. And he reminded that his coworkers that, quote, no one is paying you to get hurt. And he was also inspired to become an outreach trainer for his industry and has pursued additional health and safety training in order to do that. And he specifically cited the engaged teaching style of these skill building programs as part of his inspiration, saying he wanted to create an environment for hands-on training. So that's one example of how somebody used that training, not only to improve health and safety in his workplace and for his coworkers, but as a skill building and career development for him as he moved into being able to share his skills with others.
That's great. Building worker strength, power, and advocacy skills that then spreads out more broadly. Terrific.
Exactly.
Thank you very much. So one of the reasons we think high road partnerships are so valuable is because they're these holistic and sustained worker-employer community structures. They're problem-solving structures that, as somebody said earlier, can sort of pivot to solve problems in the moment. How do you see high road health and safety programs contributing to that ability to sort of be that long-term structure that helps workers and industries?
Yeah, I'm going to send that back to Diane.
Great, thanks. Yeah, I mean, I think you heard from Lisa's example of what that can look like. So in a lot of ways, I think health and safety is the perfect starting point for building the kind of experience working together, putting in place the infrastructure that's needed, and also building that trust that comes out of having an experience. It's really, as I think Louise did say, a win-win situation that helps both the employer and the employee. So it's a great starting point. And I think having that experience and that infrastructure embedded in the HRTP itself, as well as the training and the experience that the participants gain by being part of that, that really sets the HRTPs up to be well prepared, to be responsive to new challenges as they were with COVID. We've heard a couple of examples of that, wildfire smoke, and then other things that are going to be unfortunately coming down the pike. And I think the other thing is it underlines the need to have workers who really have a good understanding of the principles behind creating a safe workplace. Again, not just following the rules, but how do you actually set things up from the outset as a safe place to work, what's needed for that, and then to be able to help apply that thinking to these new challenges as they come up. So they really need the employees to be part of that partnership. They have to have the kind of critical thinking skills necessary to participate in that process. Yeah.
That's terrific. And then, as you point out, can take that skill building and that infrastructure and apply it to technology changes, new competition, whatever it happens to be, even outside the realm of occupational safety and health. Great.
Exactly, because they have the principles in mind. How do we approach this? How do we think about, really setting things up, looking at engineering controls or whatever is needed to create a safe workplace in the first place.
That's just perfect. Well, so I've got one final question I'd like you to address, and then I'd love to open it up to the group so we can do some back and forth and ask questions and answers. As I think everybody on this call knows, high road partnerships under the initiative are really at a bunch of different stages. Some of them are just developing, others have been around for a long time. Some of them are regionally focused. Others are trying to figure out what to do in climate impacted areas where jobs are going to be going away, and we need to figure out how to replace those jobs. So given this sort of broad variety of where HRTPs are, what are some strategies and resources that you can share that various kinds of HRTPs might be able to use in these different stages?
Sure. So I do want to share that we are excited that we have been built into the Labor Center's HRTP funding for this next round. So in the fall, we're going to be able to start doing some work with HRTP grantees to figure out exactly what would be most helpful, kind of looking to the more experienced grantees for best practices and sharing some of our own resources and putting together tools and resources that can help both with training challenges as well as with building capacity within the HRTP or the HRTP partners to have strong health and safety programs. So, and I want to share a couple of the existing resources that we'll be building on. So there are a couple of things that grew out of our research project. These two guides that you'll see here, and I think Reem is going to put the links in the chat, which are not curriculum, but this came out of our research, and it's guidelines for what needs to be in place in a workforce development program or career technical education program to help prepare the participants to be work ready for safety. So what kind of curriculum, what kind of support do the instructors and trainers need, what needs to be in place in the program. And then on the right, the problem solving for safety grew out of that and out of our work with JVS and others to sort of identify some key ways to teach some of these skills that aren't well covered within the OSHA 10. And I do want to take the opportunity, or maybe I said this already, that the OSHA 10 actually can be taught, that content can be taught more effectively. So that's something we're really interested in exploring with HRTP grantees, how you're doing that. And then secondly, one of the other things we do is provide training to small businesses and also to schools to help them develop, or in some cases, get into place their injury and illness prevention programs. So we have a lot of resources related to that and the training experience related to that. So we anticipate building that into what we have to offer as well.
Super. So folks can reach out to LOHP or your partners at UC, or your colleagues at UCLA, or organizations like yours to sort of start using what's available now, but think about doing it with this broader worker-centered approach that you have built in and advocate using these resources.
Yes, and I just put my email in the chat as well. So we will be interested in doing some pilot testing and talking to HRTP grantees. So if this is an area or something that you're interested in helping us with, please do let us know. We will be reaching out regardless, but you can let us know now.
That sounds great. And folks can share it with their partners at community colleges and their employer and union partners as well, because there are several access points that folks might want to use some of these resources, I presume. Great. Okay. Well, let's open it up to questions. Let's hear from folks in the audience. If you want, again, you can put your questions in the chat if you'd like, or just put the word STAC in the chat and we'll go ahead and call on you. Do we have any questions, or questions from the panelists to each other based on what you all heard as panelists as well? Take a moment to let people get their thoughts in order. I also want to invite comments, because I know there are people on the call who also have experience in health and safety, both challenges, workplace violence challenges, challenges around COVID, and also deep experience. And then I think there are some folks, I'm reminded of folks who in care work who are thinking about, what do care workers do if they're providing home care, for example, and a wildfire comes along and that worker is the only one in the household who's responsible for a person with a disability, and what do they do? That's clearly a health and safety issue. So open to comments and questions.
I see a hand from Casey.
Great, thanks, Casey. Go for it.
Yeah, no problems. Excuse me. Good morning, everyone. Casey Gallagher with the Labor Federation. Great seeing you all. I'll keep my questions and comments brief. As some of you know, I'm rather passionate about this subject, as well as big fans of LOHP. So thank you for creating this conversation and building on it. My question is for the first panelists of the HRTPs, the JVS, BSPs, and also UFCW, of kind of thinking about it like, okay, you've created these great things either in response to the pandemic or certain situations popping up. Where do you go from here? How do you keep the momentum going? And as well as kind of build on what you've kind of, the foundation that you've just started?
Casey, great question. I'm going to go ahead and jump in on that. So I think everybody saw today the difference between UFCW, a brand new HRTP, getting our bearings in a crisis, and Luis's experience with BSP and how quickly they were able to adapt for in-house trainings and necessary criteria to get their workers through this. We plan on utilizing our experience with LOHP to help us better understand how to develop our, industry recognized credentials, sort of that stackable sensibility. Because we have a lot of work processes in common across our industries, the use of such a broad but also somehow very specific content is something that's informed our approach going forward in designing new trainings. For example, we have a Cal OSHA 30 training for our cannabis workers, and my working with, it's sort of the siloed thing because it's Cal OSHA 30 and it just sits there like this. But with working with LOHP on this and enhancing our meat apprenticeship curriculum, I'm seeing where we may need to fold some of this content into that and partnering going forward with LOHP and UCLA potentially to make sure that that curriculum that's as decades old actually meets today's standards. So it's a really good check on what we're already providing. And again, I'm going to argue again in terms of funding directly to these organizations will make our lives a lot easier. And so I think that that's something that I'd encourage other HRTPs to explore.
Great. Luis or Elizabeth, do you want to comment on that as well?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Thank you, Casey, and really great that you're part of this. Great question, by the way. So I think for BSP, I think something that I've been saying quite a bit is I think there's a recognition that we got to think about the industry a little bit different, and we can't go back to the normal. And if we're not going to go back to the normal, then that means that we have to really think about a new way of approaching the industry and a new way of approaching workers as well, and making sure workers are at the center of that equation. What I would say is that for us, because we have had some success with vocational ESL, we've had some success with the Green Generation Program, and now with infectious disease, the way we're lining things up, and we're continuing to invest in a lot of relationship building through this labor management framework that we have. How do we envision a pathway for career mobility for workers that centers around infectious disease training, that centers around Green Education Program or something like it, right? Sustainability, but also thinking about the future, right? And how do we now think about bringing the content experts to help us develop those curriculums for that stackable certification or stackable career trajectory for property service workers, janitors. We know that this industry, and that's a challenge. We just did a survey with our employers. We know that this industry right now is having a hard time recruiting, attracting talent, but also retaining talent. So I think right now we have an opportunity. We have an open door where we're looking at how do we really bring in employers and work with employers and our labor partner to really think about how do we make sure that we address this concern that they have. How do we make this an industry that is attractive to somebody that's entering this this industry, while also retaining those individuals through stackable skills. And the only way we could do that is really thinking about professionalizing the roles, providing career pathways, but also addressing the issue of worker voice and including worker voice into the training that we provide.
Thank you, Luis.
And I would just add two things that emerged for me. Number one, when we build, when we work with employers and labor around building apprenticeship standards, we work on work processes and relay supplemental instruction, and is safety and hazard awareness, and the other thing that we've talked about today, part of that formula. If not, why not? And secondly, I think about somebody mentioned the role of community colleges. For instance, we look to community colleges to provide a lot of the technical training for our pre-apprenticeship and apprenticeship programs. And are there ways that we can build out the capacity of those community colleges to offer a richer array of OSHA training and or integrated into the technical training that they're already providing.
Great point. Really helpful. Thank you, Elizabeth. I see Blanca Lopez has her hand up. Blanca?
Hi everyone. Sorry I'm not on camera today. I'm still getting over a cold that I caught this weekend. I just want to start off by saying that I'm always grateful for the space around HRTP and the opportunities that it brings. I am directing the HRTP in the Inland Empire around the supply chain industries, the warehousing and truck driving, the transportation. And we are just getting things off the ground, and just being in the space and listening to some of what Luis had to say and just now Elizabeth, it's very reaffirming because I'm definitely going down the same pathways of what you all have mentioned, and so it's just very reaffirming to know that I'm on the right track and hear that you've all sort of led this already and created those pathways that are successful in various ways. My question is around, we're currently developing a curriculum for training This would be a curriculum to bring new community members into the industries, and OSHA would just be one part of that training. And I think what right now is looking at all the different components that we want to add to the training. It keeps getting longer, right? Another hour, another hour, another hour. And so, you know, we want to pack it with as much useful information as possible. OSHA, financial literacy, union training, right? Union leadership, what it means to have a union contract, and other aspects. And so I wonder if you all have any advice just in terms of, rather than having a training that ends up being, you know, several weeks, if there's a tactic or strategies that you all have employed in terms of getting an initial training for workers and getting them into a workplace well equipped with all of the information they need.
That's a great question and a challenging one.
I could take a quick stab at, again, just sort of, when you say OSHA training, I don't know if you're thinking about, and thank you for your question, Blanca. If you're thinking about the OSHA 10 training, but I would say, again, even though our leadership training is longer, I feel like you can provide a pretty good health and safety preparation that's very targeted to the needs of the work, you know, what are the needs for that industry that you're preparing workers for, so that they really understand how to identify those hazards, how those hazards should be controlled, and getting practice with that. It doesn't have to be 30 hours, you know, I think it can really be 5, 6, 7 hours, and especially if it's I think part of it is making it a piece of all the training that they're doing whenever they're learning any processes, how to do any of the job. That is a piece of it. And I think it can also be part of your leadership training, as if they're learning how to articulate a problem that they've identified. And it's framed in the sort of union, like they're part of a union. So how does that fit into that? What are their rights? How do they actually use those rights? I think you can meld a lot of your objectives and have health and safety be part of it. And then the health and safety piece is going to be a lot more meaningful than if it's like this little standalone thing off to the side.
Really helpful. Thanks, Diane.
Thank you, Dan.
I'd like to jump in on that too, but Blanca, I don't know if it's something that you and your team would have time for, but I really recommend HRTP staff to take the OSHA training. The dynamism again of that program and the different techniques used might help inspire meeting your population's needs. But you know, like I shared before, UFCW represents workers across the state and an array of industries and backgrounds. And so observing professionals do that well was incredibly insightful, and it helps direct my attention in ways that I don't think I would have come up with otherwise.
And maybe I'll just mention, if people are interested, just to follow up on what Sarah said, if people are interested in learning more about those kind of training opportunities, please be in touch with LOHP. I think Diane put her email there, and we can provide information about those kinds of training opportunities coming up in the next period of time.
Thank you. That would be great.
Any other thoughts for Blanca? Okay. Any final questions? We've got about 4 minutes left. Any final questions? And if not, I'll ask if there are any wrap-up comments from our panelists. Before I do that, I'll let folks know that we will. Blanca, you requested that we sort of package all of these great links and resources together. We'll do that and send them out with a link to the video so that you can share it with folks who weren't able to join us today, and just stay in touch that way. But we will get those resources out to everybody. Any last thoughts from any of the panelists before we wrap up for the day?
I do. I would like to thank you, Pam and Karina, for organizing this and keeping it tight and effective for HRTP. Your work has been good. Thank you.
Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you. Thanks, Karina. Karina makes it happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Karina.
Any other last comments from the panelists or from anybody on the call?
Again, I'd like to thank you too, Pam. And this is really your leadership in helping pull all this together has been wonderful, and encourage folks to reach out to us. I put this in the chat, but for example, Blanca, we're happy to have some initial, especially as we think forward to what are we going to be providing HRTP grantees in the future. We'd love to start having conversations with folks about what would actually help you. But thanks again for everyone who came and for this great opportunity.
That's terrific. I want to thank all the panelists, all the participants as well, and the panelists in particular. You know, again, the principle of going to workers who do the work for expertise is always at the forefront of HRTP work. Elizabeth, Luis, and Sarah, you are the experts, and we really appreciate that. And then Laura and Diane, you know, subject matter experts, as we've heard over and over today, are just critical. So this is the kind of dynamic partnership between subject matter experts and HRTP practitioner experts that can make change. We thank you all very, very much. We'll close it out for the day, and I'll put in a plug for our next workshop on tech and work. Things like how artificial intelligence is impacting workers, everything from hiring to monitoring on the job, and some challenges that we face. So thanks, everybody, and we're done. We'll see you next time. Take care. Thanks, Karina. Thanks, team.